Hey friend, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today we're going to answer the question, what is the Abbey Road reverb trick? Today I'm going to explain and demonstrate for you the Abbey Road reverb trick using mainly just a reverb and an EQ, but we're going to have some fun with some extra things as well here. And all of these techniques are going to help you dial in a reverb sound that fits both your vocal and your track style. But before we dive in here, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the vocal mixing process and really start to dial in your EQ strategy when it comes to mixing vocals, then I have just the thing for you. It is my ultimate guide to vocal EQ, and it's just a simple PDF guide that will walk you through how to EQ your vocals step by step to help you get professional and polished sounding vocal mixes without any more of the guesswork. It is a completely free guide, and you can download it below using the link in the video description. Now let's jump in here and take a look at this vocal. Now this is a finished mix here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the reverb that we currently have on the vocal. So I'm going to mute the reverb here that I'm currently using. I want you to hear the dry vocal inside the track here. We're going to listen to this verse section. Oop, I keep bumping my microphone here. And then we're going to create a reverb using the Abbey Road reverb trick. So here's our dry vocal inside the track. All right, so our first piece here is we're going to create a reverb for our track. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to add a bus channel, and we'll just call it plate verb. I'm probably going to shoot for a plate reverb. If I could spell right, that would be nice too. I color all my effects white here, and we'll make sure it's sending to the mix bus here. We will solo safe it, and then from our vocal, we will send into the plate reverb. So we're sending it from our vocal into the plate reverb here. Let's throw just the stock reverb from Studio One on here, the room reverb, and we'll grab, I like starting with the flat plate setting. It's a really nice reverb sound, the flat plate is. So let's solo up our vocal here, and let's just take a listen to the raw flat plate reverb. So that's a nice plate sound. Let's dial it in inside the mix here and at least set it inside the track before we go any further. So this is our first piece of the puzzle here, is just getting our reverb set. All right, I've left the reverb quite a bit hotter than I would usually put it inside the mix. That way we can hear it as we mess with it here as well. Created a tighter loop so we don't have to keep going back and forth here. Now, the next piece of the puzzle with our Abbey Road reverb trick is we're going to EQ our reverb return here. So I'm going to solo up just the reverb here, and let's mess with it a little bit to start. So we have some heavier artifacts that I want to get rid of first and foremost here. So we're going to roll off some bottom end to start. You can see there's not a lot down there, but we have some artifacts and some noise that come up, especially on the T when he says turn. We get a bump in bottom end here that I really don't want coming through on our reverb. So I'm going to roll up our high pass filter here to start, and we're going to see if we can clean up the reverb. All right, I'm liking it around 400 hertz there. We're at 390 hertz, 12 dB per octave slope here, and it's just rolling off a little bit of that mud, a little bit of that heaviness sitting here around 2 and 300 on our reverb return. So take a listen without and then with. I'll kick this in. So it thins out our reverb a little bit and cleans up some of that heaviness and that muddiness in the bottom end. Any kind of low end energy, even if it's low mid energy, I usually only want coming from one source. And here I just want it coming from the vocal. Any kind of warmth and bottom end, I just want coming from the main lead vocal. I don't want it coming through on any of the effects, that we put on top of the vocal. So that's our first piece here, is rolling in that high pass filter on our EQ. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to roll off some of the top end here and see if we can control. I can't talk today. See if we can control some of the top end air here on our vocal. So I'm digging it a little bit higher. Sometimes I'll come all the way down to around 5 or 6K here. I'm digging it around 9K here. We're at 9.35K, and it's just enough of a roll off on the top end here. We're using a 12 dB per octave slope that it rolls off some of that harshness and some of that brittleness that we get, especially in the sibilance range. So pay attention this time. I'll start without it, and then I'll kick it in. Pay attention to the sibilance range, so the S's and the T's on the vocal here. It's a lot smoother. We're not rolling off that much here on the top end, only coming into about 9K, but it makes the reverb so much smoother. The sibilance range for me is quite similar to any kind of heaviness or warmth we add on the vocal. I only want it coming from the primary source. I don't want to add or enhance the sibilance range with reverbs and delays and effects that I stack on top of the vocal. The sibilance range should just be coming from the main vocal track. So that's why we're rolling off some of that top end here on the lead vocal. So let's put this back in, at least with our lead vocal, and then we'll throw it in on our track as well. So here's without our EQ, and then I'll kick our EQ in. Two moves here, a little bit of high pass filter, a little bit of low pass filter, and we've greatly cleaned up our reverb sound. So let's throw it inside the track here and see how we're sounding with the rest of the mix. Without our EQ in the chain there after our reverb, things feel a little bit muddier, our reverb feels cloudy, and it makes our lead vocal feel cloudy inside the mix. We kick that EQ in post-reverb here, cleans up the bottom end, gets rid of all that heaviness and that cloudiness, and it smooths out the top end on our vocal reverb here. Now the next thing we can do, we can take it a step further, and we can actually pull out some of the mid-range here on the vocal reverb, excuse me. So let me hit play here on just the reverb again, and let's see if we can find some nasty mid-range frequencies that we don't need coming through on our reverb. So right there, we're at 1.18K. It's getting a little fluttery and a little bouncy. I don't want that kind of basketball gymnasium sound effect coming through on the vocal. So I'm going to pull a little bit of this 1.18K area out here on our vocal reverb. Just 3 dB out there at about 1K, and you can hear how much clearer our vocal sounds. It sounds lighter, it sounds airier, it sounds like a reverb should sound. It's not all fluttery and bouncy sounding. So let's throw that in with our vocal here. So just our lead vocal and the reverb, and then we'll throw it back inside the track as well. Sounding much cleaner and much clearer on our vocal because of the EQ we're putting on our reverb here. Now that's essentially the Abbey Road reverb trick, is rolling off a little bit of top end, a little bit of bottom end, and maybe cleaning up some of the mid-range on our reverb. It's essentially just EQing your reverb to sit with your vocal and to sit with your track. But we can take it a step further and get a little bit closer to the sound that we would have if we were actually at, a place like Abbey Road and we were doing the Abbey Road reverb trick. And we can get there by adding a little bit of saturation here on our reverb. So I'm going to throw a tape machine after our reverb here, and let's see if we can get a little tape saturation going on our reverb. I'm going to solo up our reverb one more time here, and let's just mess with it a little bit and see what we can get. All right, so these are the settings I've kind of settled on here on the tape machine. I've pushed the amount up to almost 7, 6.9 here. I just want the VU sitting almost up to 0. We're sitting between 5 and 3 here on the VU meter pushing in. I've dialed it up to 30 IPS here on the tape speed, and then I'm using Type A. Type B was the heaviest sounding to me. Type C felt the most even, but I liked the top end saturation we're getting on Type A here. So we're gonna leave it on Type A. Let's see our before and after here with our tape machine. So without the tape machine and then with. So for me, it's doing a couple of things. Number one, it's making the reverb much more even. We're getting some subtle tape compression, some tape saturation coming from the machine here that's evening out our vocal reverb here. So it's not bouncing all over the place as the vocal gets louder. Our reverb isn't blowing up. It's staying very, very even. And we're also getting some nice color that's making our reverb feel a little bit deeper. It's adding some depth to our digital reverb here. So let's throw it in with our vocal first, and then one more time inside the track. So those are the principles and those are the techniques we can use with our Abbey Road reverb trick. We're creating a reverb for our vocal track. Then after our reverb here, we're rolling off some bottom end with a high pass filter to clean up that muddiness, rolling off some top end with a low pass filter, taking care of some of that sibilance range, pulling out any kind of fluttering we're getting in the mid range here, and then afterwards adding a little bit of saturation, whether it's console saturation or tape saturation, to enhance the depth on our vocal reverb. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to go a little bit deeper into the vocal mixing process and really start dialing in your EQ strategy, then I have just the tool for you, and it is completely free. It is my ultimate guide to vocal EQ, and you can download it below to start creating more professional vocal mixes in less time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.